What's good? This is Deontay Curl, host of Turn Up the Volume Podcast, and I am in my city, Southeast D.C, at the Frederick Douglass historic home here in Washington, D.C. on W Street, Southeast. I'm here to take a tour. Today's July the 5th, I believe, and today is the second day that they have reopened. They were doing some construction, putting in an HVAC system. So if you know anything about my channel, I live in the Maryland DMV area. I'm from DC, Southeast, Northeast area where I grew up. And there is a lot of history here in our city, my city. And today I wanted to show you all some pictures that I took, because when you go inside the home, you can't take any video, but you can take pictures with no flash, because they're trying to preserve the artifacts. And a lot of the things or the items inside of the home is original. It was here when Frederick Douglass was alive and well. And just to give you a little bit of facts, I'm actually walking down the steps. And mind you, this is where the steps that lead up to his house. So he lived on a hill. And for an African American in the mid to late 1800s to own a piece of property this big in the heart of Southeast, in the middle of the Southeast, was amazing. I think he bought the home for $6,700. I think is when he bought the home. I'm not too sure what that is in today's economy or in today's money, how much that would equate to. I would look it up and probably put it in the video somewhere. Frederick Douglass was born Frederick Augustus Bailey, if I'm not mistaken, in February. He originally thought 1817, but I think after he died, when they were looking at some of the slave records from the plantation from where he was born and, you know, where he was actually born around or in 1818, February. There's no actual date, so February of 1818 was his actual birth date. He died February the 20th, 1895. And so this here is the visitor center. You come in, you get your tickets, you see a video, I'll take some pictures, you'll be able to see that. And I'll do some commentary. How y'all doing? Do some commentary on it. But this was all of his property. All of this was his. And so they're doing some construction across the street, houses and landscaping work, so excuse that. But Frederick Douglass, like I said, he was born 1818 on a plantation in Maryland. He was born on a plantation in Maryland. And one of the interesting things about Frederick Douglass, he was an abolitionist. He escaped slavery. He married Anna Marie Douglass, and she helped him to escape slavery, you know, and to get him out of where he was. I think they had 5 children, one of which died young, if I'm not mistaken. Anna Marie Douglass, they were married all of 44 years. She died in this house. She had her own room. Understand the timing back then, husbands and wives. Today, I'm sorry, my head looks sweat. I've been out here in this heat. Husbands and wives today, we share rooms. We sleep in the same room. The culture of the time, husband and wives had their own rooms. Now, when you came together to do what adults do, you did what you did in whoever's room. But culture of the time was you had your own room. Frederick Douglass had his own room. And Marie Douglass had her own room. After Anna Marie Douglass passed away, he ended up marrying Helen Pitts Douglass. Douglass ended up becoming her name. And she is also, just like Anna Marie Douglass, when she was alive, she helped to keep the home up, you know, to take care of it. To my understanding, the tour guide said that Anna Marie Douglass and Helen Pitts would have crossed paths, because Helen Pitts originally worked for Frederick Douglass, and so she would have been given orders by Anna Marie Douglass at some point in time supposedly. And so after Anna Marie Douglass passes away, Frederick Douglass then marries Helen Pitts, who becomes Helen Pitts Douglass. And because their marriage, because she was a white woman, and so because their marriage was not popular, or it was not favored upon by her family, she ended up, to my understanding, losing some communication with family because they did not approve of her marriage. And so with that, she had to turn to other resources to help make sure that this house was preserved, ultimately coming eventually under the care of the National Park Service, who now keeps the facility and tends to the grounds. Like I said, today is July 5th. They just opened back up. And so I want to give you more information and more details with pictures that I was able to take. So excuse some of the pictures, they might be dark because there's no lighting in there, and when you take pictures, they don't want you to use any flash. So I'll do my best to explain certain things about the home. All right, let's go. All right, so when you first come to Frederick Douglass's house, you first want to go where you kind of have to go. You can walk the grounds if you want to, but you have to walk into, or go into rather, the Frederick Douglass Home Visitor Information Center. In the information center, there's a bookstore. You can buy all kinds of wonderful and beautiful trinkets. You can buy Frederick Douglass's autobiographies. I believe he wrote three of them. And any kind of information about the city of Washington, D.C. You can buy other books about Black history, trinkets, and like I said earlier, trinkets and different things of that nature. When you walk in, you're also greeted by a Park Service member who will, greet you, of course. And if you're there for a tour, you can check in there. Then what ends up happening is you get to go into the theater. Now, mind you, I am from Washington D.C., so my first time ever, I remember my first time ever being at the Frederick Douglass house was I was in kindergarten. And when I was in kindergarten, my class took a trip to the Frederick Douglass house. I never forget it. I remember it like it was yesterday, and I'm only 31 years old. And so some things have changed because my mother took pictures when we went to this particular trip. But like I said, after you're greeted by a Park Service representative, you get to go into the auditorium, and this is the auditorium that you go into. You get to watch a short video of Frederick Douglass, who's played by, I can't think of his last name, but I think his name is Hugh something. I can't think of his name. But Anna Marie Douglass is played by comedian Phyllis Yvonne Stickley. Shout out to her, who played Anna Marie Douglass. And the video was actually shot, I think, in the 80s. But the Park Service ranger at the front desk told me that they've redone the video, and so it's more updated with new actors. I think they shot it last year, but you'll get to see that sometime next year in 2024. But you get to see kind of a reenactment of Frederick Douglass, and the video is about him in his office meditating about his life as a slave, his marriage to Anna Marie Douglass, how he met Helen Pitts, and it kind of ends out, with Frederick Douglass walking up to his home being questioned by a young man, which is presumably the day that he passed away. It seems like you can come to that conclusion, but you get to watch this video and then you get to check in. I was not scheduled to be on this tour. I happened to join in of a group that had already reserved to be on this tour. I think three people didn't show up, so I was able to join in because they had three slots left. And just for anybody who wants to come visit Frederick Douglass's house, if you're like one or two, three people and you did not reserve, understand that these tours do book up fairly quickly. If it's a one-off and you're just by yourself, you may luck up and be able to join somebody else's tour. So, yep, that's kind of what I did. Let's also go out of the auditorium and look at some of the artifacts or some of the things that you'll see in the visitor center. So once you leave out of the visitor center, you will see some things on the wall. Like this is the North Star. The North Star was the paper that Frederick Douglass started, and here's a copy of it, rather, that's up on the wall. There's information about that. Also, what you'll see is you'll see a picture of Frederick Douglass's family. You'll see Anna Marie Douglass at the top. You'll see Helen Pitts at the very bottom, who was his second wife. And in the middle, you'll see his five children, Rosetta, Louis, Frederick Douglass, the second, and I can't think of his other two children's name. One of which passed away because I can't see it because it's so far away from where I'm looking. Anyway, one of his children passed away at a young age, I believe 10. And just note that he had 21 grandchildren. I think a great deal of them passed away and didn't make it to see adulthood for whatever reason. That time frame, sometimes children did not make it to adulthood because of different diseases and sicknesses, and of course they didn't have medicine and different kinds of research that we do now to treat the different diseases. But that's ultimately what happened. And so, one of the other interesting things, we'll talk about it later. You'll also see a couple of years ago, I worked not too far from the Frederick Douglass home. So sometimes on my lunch break, I would come up to do a tour because I always was inspired when I came to Frederick Douglass's home, just because of knowing who he is and knowing how prominent he was and what he stood for and what he fought for. And this African American owned a home the size that it was in Southeast of D.C. And if anybody's from D.C., you know Southeast can be a dangerous neighborhood. But there was a prominent figure who helped to fight for our freedom before Martin Luther King's time, before Medgar Evers' time. There was a man named Frederick Douglass. And this picture here, they used to have his death cast. And a death cast back then is when a person died, they would do like a death cast to get the very last likeness of the person after they passed away. So there's a death cast that actually exists of Frederick Douglass. This is they I guess they used some kind of clay or what have you, and they put it on the person's face, and it becomes hard, and you get to see the last likeness of that person before they're funeralized and buried and what have you. This is the death cast of his face and his right hand, I believe. And so when I used to come on the tour a couple years ago before COVID, they had the actual death cast in this enclosure, but as they reopened on July 4th, some of the artifacts, they took them out to help preserve them, to, I guess, do whatever they have to do to keep them preserved. So some of the artifacts were removed and they put new artifacts out and things of that nature. But this is the death cast. It's very interesting. So when Frederick Douglass passed away, this is what he looked like. And this is the actual death cast that came off of his face. So we're going to go out and we're going to go up to Frederick Douglass's home. And just to give you all a sense of, what his home looked like, and some of those images and video footage. All right, so let's go. So here I am. I'm walking up, leaving the visitor center, and I'm joining these wonderful group of African Americans who were from Texas. And we're going up to the front door of Frederick Douglass's house. That is his house right there. Yep, that's his house. And we have to walk up these steps. And mind you, we had to walk up another set of steps before we got to where we are right now in this video here. And already these people are tired. They are a bit older than me, of course. The youngest one in that group looked no more than 10 years old. God bless her heart. Anyway, we had to walk up these steps and just look at the land, the hill that Frederick Douglass owned. Just look at his property, entrance to the historic home. These were the steps. I'm not too sure if these steps were there when he got there or if they were replaced. I'm pretty sure this railing probably was not there. But here's me. I'm recording just so you can get some insight in terms of what it was like to walk up to the steps to the home of Frederick Douglass. And this is, if you were a reporter or a visitor who wanted to come see Frederick Douglass, you kind of had to go up this hill, probably these steps, to knock on the front door to be greeted by the servant or whoever worked at Frederick Douglass's home. this is what you had to kind of go through to get there. And so, excuse the cone, there was some work going on there. And then we continued to go up. There was already a group in session that was coming off of their tour, and they're coming out of the home. And so, just look at the beautiful view that Frederick Douglass looked at each and every morning when he stepped out onto his front porch. He looked to the very right, he could see Maryland, where he was enslaved, and to the very left, you can see the monument, the nation's capital. And so, I kind of blocked the audio out in this particular video because this is where the park ranger is describing to the very right, when Frederick Douglass looked out, where you see me pointing, that is the state of Maryland. And Frederick Douglass had the ability to reflect a great deal when he was on his front porch that, hey, to the very right of you is where you were once enslaved. And then to the very left of you is the nation's capital, where the president is, where the Washington Monument is, where you can see, that's where his future was, where he was the recorder of deeds, the first U.S. marshal, and things of that nature. So I want to give you all a picture of the front of Frederick Douglass's home, and this is what his home looks like. It is a beautiful home. I mean, a beautiful home. I think, so let's just give you a few facts. So Frederick Douglass and his first wife, Anna Marie Douglass, they moved to Cedar Hill in 1878. Frederick Douglass lived there for a total of 17 years before he passed away. So later in his life, this is when he moved to Cedar Hill. Initially, it was a 14-room home, and he paid $6,700 for the home back then. And in today's time, that would be the equivalent of about $1.3 million today. So for his time, Frederick Douglass was a very, very, very wealthy man. Understood he was a speaker, understood he was an abolitionist. He was not educated because he was a slave. He was born a slave, and so it was forbidden for him to read. He would go around, particularly up north where he escaped slavery, to tell about his experiences. He wrote his first narrative, his first autobiography, The Narrative of Frederick Douglass, and he became very, very popular among people, so much so where there were a great deal of people who questioned if he was actually a slave because of how intelligent and well spoken he was. And so imagine going through what you went through as an enslaved person, and then people questioning as to whether or not if you're telling the truth about the experience that you had as a slave. And so that is just some of the things that he had to go through. Before they moved to Cedar Hill, they lived in Rochester, New York. I believe they had a mansion there. And Rochester, New York is where he's actually buried as well. And before they moved to D.C., their home was burned down by an arson. Some suspected it was the Ku Klux Klan or white nationalists of that time who set fire to his home. Of course, that devastated the family, particularly Anna Marie Douglass. And so he bought this home really for her, to my understanding, based upon what the park ranger told us. And it was a beautiful home. It sat on a hill, which, understand that when they lost their last home in Rochester, New York, due to an arson, people burning down their home, if they wanted to set fire to this home, you kind of got to run up a hill and run down a hill, but that's the front of his home. And now, since Frederick Douglass had lived at Cedar Hill, he renamed it to Cedar Hill because there were cedar trees, if I'm not mistaken, on the property. He renamed it to Cedar Hill. And so not only that, but he added on to the home. So initially it was 14 rooms. I think by the time he died, he was able to add on other rooms, and now it is a 21 room mansion. And so yes, there is a mansion in the heart of DC. This picture here is a still image that I took. All of these images are from me and my iPhone. God bless the iPhone. This is the front of the literally on the front porch of Frederick Douglass's home, and this is what he would look at each and every morning. Beautiful view, beautiful scenery. This here is a picture from the bottom of the hill, just looking up to the home of Frederick Douglass. All right, so now we are on the front porch. Let's go inside of the home. All right. Well, first, I want to show you all this. When you walk up to Frederick Douglass's home, this is the doorknob. I believe it's a Greek goddess, if I'm not mistaken. And this doorknob, I can't remember the name of it, but the park rangers say that the doorknob represented liberty, freedom, justice. So anybody who fought for the freedom of the enslaved, when they saw this, it was kind of inspiring and something that they would recognize, because you're walking up to a home of a famous abolitionist. But anyway, let's go from outside. Let's go on the inside and see what we find on the inside. This is this is what we see behind the front door. So right now you're standing in the foyer. Like I said, during COVID, the house was shut down from tours. They had to put in a new HVAC system to preserve a lot of the artifacts, because when you have a historic home like this, majority of the things in here are original, and particularly for Frederick Douglass's house, it has been, a lot of the artifacts are over 100 years old. And so with time, sensitivity to sunlight, to things of that nature, that's why a lot of my pictures may be dark, because they don't have a lot of light on the inside. There was no electricity back then. So hence, Frederick Douglass did not have an electric bill. He never knew what it was like to pay an electricity bill, because there was no electricity. And so they used a lot of daylight. That's why the windows are so big and so tall, because they use a lot of candles and daylight and things of that nature. And when it got dark, it just simply got dark. Okay, so here you are into the foyer. When you came into Frederick Douglass's home, you were greeted by staff who worked for Frederick Douglass, and I believe they had your name on like some kind of card if he was expecting you or what have you. And there is an east and west parlor in this foyer, which had curtains to close off each one, because sometimes he might be in his office, which was in the east parlor, located to the far back. And if he was able to talk to you, he would come out and greet you. If you were a stranger, not necessarily family, you would go to the East Parlor, where it would be more formal, and he would talk and do interviews and things of that nature. In the West Parlor, you had a piano, which I'll show you in a minute, and that's where he entertained friends, family, grandchildren. Like I said, he had 21 grandchildren. And so let's go into the East Parlor. The East Parlor, this is the East Parlor. The East Parlor, that is in the very far corner, is a picture of a gentleman. I can't remember his name. Yes, Wendell Phillips. And Wendell Phillips, in the very far back of this picture, you'll see a bust sitting on that white kind of stand there. It's a picture of Wendell Phillips. It was his ride or die man, as the tour guide said. The tour guide, she said that was his ride or die, one of his ride or die buddies, who was a white man, who supported him in his fight for freedom, and telling his story and work as an abolitionist. And this is the original furniture, I believe, from when Frederick Douglass lived there. On the very wall, you see a picture of his first wife, Anna Marie Douglass, who was very pivotal. She was born free. And not only was she born free, she, from what I was told, refused to marry Frederick Douglass while he was enslaved. So she helped him to escape slavery, supported him in his endeavors. When they lived in Rochester, New York, when he would go away and do speaking engagements or what have you, he would send money home, and she would put the money directly into the bank account. And so when he came home, he would see in the account, and everything that he sent home was there. And so it was a way for him to kind of test her, to see if she would do that type of thing, like take care of the home, or would she spend money on herself type thing. And so even while he was away, they got the chance to trust each other, and build that type of trust, that even if I'm not home, you'll take care of the home, and even while you're away, you'll do what you have to do to, represent our family and do the right thing. And so you also see a music box there. You see a bench by the window. And let's get a greater look at that window. These original. If you look up at the very top, you'll see the wallpaper that's like greenish and yellow with trees. He was the minister to Haiti, minister to Haiti, and so all throughout the house you'll see this wallpaper, and it's like a homage or a head nod to Haiti. That it represents his work as the minister to Haiti. And so we continue on. This is a. Oh, well, let me show you this picture of Anna Marie Douglas, so just so you can see it up closer. I try to take a closer picture because, of course, it is roped off. You can't go but so far because they don't want you touching a lot of things. But that is Anna Marie Douglas, his first wife. This is a fuller image. Here's our wonderful tour guide here. I can't remember her name, but she was so nice to us. And so here is the east parlor of Frederick Douglass's home, right to the very left when you walk into the front door. This is the formal room where if he did not know you, this is where you came. If he did not know you and he was willing and available to talk to you, you would come into this room and he would talk to you. If you were a reporter, this is where you would meet Frederick Douglass. You would pull up a chair, he would pull up a chair, and he would talk to you. And to the very right where the tour guide is standing, that leads to his office. And so as we turn to the right, once we turn to the right, we see this picture of this gentleman here. This gentleman is Blanche Bruce. He was as a tour guide put, the first black senator of the United States, and he was a senator of Mississippi. He was a great friend of Frederick Douglass. He was his, what did she say? He was his best man at his second wedding to Helen Pitts Douglass. He was also a pallbearer to Frederick Douglass when Frederick Douglass passed away. And that is a coat rack, I believe that is original, and little off to the right. The gentleman at the very top is Louis Hippolyte. He was the president of Haiti at the time, or the same time rather, that Frederick Douglass was the minister to Haiti. So Frederick Douglass spent a lot of time in Haiti traveling. And at the very bottom of Mr. Hippolyte is the picture of his second wife, Helen Pitts Douglass. And Helen Pitts Douglass was his second wife. She was a white woman, and interracial marriages were not popular at the time, so her family frowned upon it. And they married about 18 months after his first wife, Anna Marie Douglass, passes away. Frederick Douglass's children were not happy about him being married to a white woman because they felt that it was kind of a slap in the face to their mother, who had passed away 18 months before. I would argue that they probably thought it was too soon, number two. And number three, they probably thought he was selling out the people. But Frederick Douglass responded to this. Frederick Douglass said, and I'm paraphrasing his words, that his first wife was a representation of his mother because his mother was black. And so his second wife was a representation of his father, who was white. So, and he was saying so much so, what business is it of the world to want to be so upset or have an opinion about who I decide to marry? And some people have issues with this because how are you going to be an abolitionist marrying a woman who probably does not understand what you go through, does not understand your challenges or your struggle as a black man? But, and I understand that while some people have issues with interracial marriages, particularly coming from the African diaspora, we have to kind of give Helen Pitts kudos because if we really go back in history, and the park ranger will tell you this, in some articles would tell us this, that when Frederick Douglass passes away, it is his children that actually want to sell the home and get rid of the home. But Helen Pitts Douglass fought and actually bought them all out, or paid, gathered up enough money to pay the children off to buy the home from them because she wanted to preserve the home, because she understood what preserving the home meant. It would give people the opportunity to learn more about Frederick Douglass, what he worked for, what he fought for. So it's also not just because of Anna Marie Douglass, who helped preserve the home in the time that she spent here and giving orders, to the various servants to preserve certain things. But even after she dies, Helen Pitts is responsible for making sure that the home is available for us today, for me to even go inside to take pictures and do a tour, to give it to you all the way that I give it to you. So that's Helen Pitts Douglass. Here's a little closer picture of Louis Hippolyte, the president of Haiti. And so after we go there, to the very left of all of this is the view of Frederick Douglass's office. And this is a picture I was able to take. This is his office. This is where he wrote his last autobiography here. His second wife, Helen Pitts, helped him to write that autobiography in this office. To the very right is a bookcase. He allegedly read all of those books. The desk here is original. It was originally his. This chair is a different chair. They do have the original chair that Frederick Douglass used in his office. This chair is a timepiece to kind of give you a sense of the time period from whence Frederick Douglass was alive that would have been around. But I believe they're doing some. I don't know if they're doing any work to the chairs, but to the original chair. But they said they would potentially bring the original chair back. Those were some of his canes. One cane that he had was a gift from the family of Abraham Lincoln that would have been in the visitor center, but that was also removed during the renovations. Also, just to note, my father-in-law is a construction worker, and his company back in the early 2000s did some construction and some renovations at this home. And him and my brother-in-law worked for that particular company. They found interesting things in the yard, like rattles from that time period, and baby rattles, and different kind of artifacts, which were very cool. And so here's another image of his office. You get to see the bookcase a little better. You get to see a picture of Frederick Douglass on the wall. Beautiful wallpaper. Here's another view, or another picture rather. You see the banister is roped off so that you can come into the office, but you can't go but so far. And so that's another picture of his office. To the very left of the office, you see another bookcase. You see a picture of Abraham Lincoln. I cannot remember the lady that's hanging up there. But yes, a closer picture of his desk. Some the glasses there are original. You see some books and some envelopes that are original there. Just a very cool sight to see and to be a part of history. You're literally stepping into the 19th century, 1895, which was the year that he died. You're literally stepping back in time. Okay, all right. So let's step out of Frederick Douglass's office. Let's step out of the east parlor. Let's go back into the foyer. And these are the steps. Once you turn from this here, you turn around, you see the steps. Okay? And so these are the steps that lead up to the second floor where the bedrooms are. Straight ahead, you see the kitchen. And I'm going to show another picture of this foyer at the very end to talk about Frederick Douglass's death. All right, but to the very right of this, we see the West Parlor. And the West Parlor was a more so informal place where Frederick Douglass would greet, his family members. If you were a friend of Frederick Douglass, this is where you would come. You would come to the West Parlor, and I'm going to show you a picture of the West Parlor in just a second once I pull it up. This is the West Parlor, and you see right to the very left, you see that curtain. That curtain will be pulled, pulled closed. You would close the room off, rather. And so when somebody knocked on the door to come request to meet with Frederick Douglass, depending upon where you fell in terms of family member or friend, you would come here. He would entertain his grandchildren here. He would play with them. He would play the violin. The piano is original that you see here. That is the piano that even his daughter Rosetta played upon. And a couple years ago, they would have, I think, the violin that he played sitting on top of the piano. So this was a more so informal room. In the very far right in the corner, you see like this kind of red stand. I had to look back at some of my old pictures that I took when I came to Frederick Douglass' house years ago. There used to be a bust of Frederick Douglass sitting there. I don't know what happened to it. I forgot to even ask. But a lot of these artifacts are original to the home. The furniture, for the most part, is original to the home. Straight ahead above the fireplace is a picture of a scene from Othello, Shakespeare piece of um, Shakespeare work, Othello. And so just know that Frederick Douglass at this time was into Othello, even though he didn't have an education. He understood culture, he understood art, he understood all of that stuff. And so it is amazing when you walk into this house where you see how tapped into the culture he was and tapped into, you know, the time. So I was able to take some other pictures from different angles of the West Parlor. This is the picture of the piano that is original. Upon this piano set once upon a time the violin that Frederick Douglass played. I believe they have that back in their storage where they store certain things that belong to Frederick Douglass. This is to the very right of that room where you see a chair. You get to see the tall windows looking out of the front. There's a bookcase where books would be. And so this is the West Parlor where he entertained people. Now, coming out of the West Parlor, we're back into the foyer. Straight ahead, we're going, not up the steps, but straight ahead, we're going into the dining room. Let's go into the dining room where Frederick Douglass would have dinner. This is the dining room of Frederick Douglass. This table is original. The table is a pull-out table where you can make it longer, extend it. The chair that's pulled out was Frederick Douglass's chair. And an interesting fact, I took some pictures and hopefully you can see it. This chair had wheels on it. And the reason why it had wheels because Frederick Douglass was a tall man. He was over 6 foot tall, 6 feet tall, and so he would be able to scoot back, roll back with the wheels at the bottom of the chair. This is a better image of the chair, and the tour guide told us that he would sit towards. How can I say this? He would sit facing the windows that we see in this picture because let's not forget he was once a slave. He had one of his homes burnt down by an arson, and so he did train two of his sons because they fought in the war. I believe it was the Civil War, if I'm not mistaken. And so he prepared and trained them, so it was not strange, even if he probably had some firearms in the home to protect his home from intruders. And so, because typical men, we don't sit with our backs towards any door or windows because if something pops off, we want to be able to see. So he sat facing the windows so that way he could see if anybody was approaching those windows. He could look to the right, he could see the front door if somebody was trying to break into the front door, and he could look to the left to see towards the back of the home. And so it's just a man thing. And so this is a picture of his dining room. Before we go further back, this is actually, it used to be the kitchen. But when Frederick Douglass bought the home, he turned it from the kitchen into the dining room. Beautiful furniture. The china there is original. The utensils are original. And he just had a beautiful home. A beautiful, beautiful, beautiful home. This picture here is, I asked about this, and this picture is the inaugural committee. So Frederick Douglass was a part of the inaugural committee of the 23rd president, Benjamin C. Harrison, and you might be able to see him at the very top, towards the right, where you see him with his afro. He was a part of the inaugural committee for the 23rd president, Benjamin C. Harrison, and so this picture drapes over the fireplace. And as you're going throughout the kitchen, they have some of the original china that they had. It's glassed off, but you can see it in the closet there. This is his original china. And once you go from the dining room, you go into the addition to the back of the house, which was an addition that Frederick Douglass added. This is kind of like when someone baked pies or cakes, they put it in this particular furniture piece here to cool off because there was no central air, so they had to leave windows open. And so, of course, naturally, if squirrels or birds smell food, they're going to come running. And so, if there was any kind of sweets that was cooked, they put them in this here where it could cool off, but rodents and different things couldn't get to it. This here is an ice box where the person will come and deliver ice every morning. and also he had an ice cream maker. It was fancy for his time to have these things because only wealthy people could have these types of items. And Frederick Douglass was one of those people that could have these items because of who he was, what he did for a living, and so on and so forth. And so we're going from back from like this pantry area. Look at those wonderful people that were allowing me to join their tour. We're going back into the laundry room, and these are some of the pantry items that you'll see. And now we are in the laundry room. That is, uh, so they didn't have any faucets. There were really no faucets and things of that nature. They were able to wash their clothes and get water from a cistern when the rain would fall. And they would have to pump out of this thing here to get the water to be able to do this, wash their clothes. They had no washing machines and dryers the way that we have them today. They had to use the old fashioned washboards and the old fashioned machinery here to wash the clothes. We kind of had to send the clothes through to wash them and to wring them out and things of that nature. And you can tell, it had to be in a room like this with brick because with all that water you get spills. There's really no drainage the way that we have them today. And you see some irons, original irons that was used to iron his clothes. And his wife, Anna Marie Douglas, she was very proud of him and the work that he did. And she wanted him to look well and to look good. And so she used things like this to put the ruffles in his shirt, the time period, the kind of clothes they wore. And so this was the laundry room that was added on. And so we go from here, we go into the kitchen. And this is the kitchen area, right on the other side of the laundry room. Understand that back then, kitchens were not really in the home because, you know, they're not made the way they are today, and a kitchen could burn a home down. And so this was a fancy kitchen for that time period in the 19th century. You see the table, you see the stove. I'm trying to give you a better shot of the stove there. The the different kind of pots and pans they would use. I mean, he was at the top. He was a wealthy man, and so he had what was considered wealthy equipment for the time period. And so you can see the table here. You can see a ledger of some of the items that Mrs. Douglas bought back then that they were able to kind of put on display. And you see the lady going up the steps. This is going up to the second floor, the backside. And so as we go up the stairs, we see, or we're in rather, the area that was also added on by Frederick Douglass. And this is where he kept his trunks, his suitcases, because he traveled a lot. These suitcases are original. There are no items in there as far as I'm concerned. The room to the very back to the far right was a room where people would sleep. Some would be his grandchildren, and that held some bunk beds, I believe. They use that room as storage nowadays. But before you get back there, you look to the right. This was the room where his grandchildren would sleep. One, I believe this room belonged to his oldest grandchild. I think Frederick Douglass the third. I think the lady told us. And so this is the bed that he would sleep on in that room. You can see the space, kind of how big the area is, and that's kind of where his grandchildren would sleep in that area. We come out of that room, and what we see when we come out of that room, we see we go into the original part of the house. Now this room here, so Frederick Douglass's house was set up like a dormitory. As I said in the beginning of the video, um, even if you were married, you did not sleep in the same room every day because that was culture. Back in that Victorian era, men and women had their own rooms. Even the Queen and King of England, they don't sleep in the same room. They have their own space because how they viewed sexuality, and it was almost like a taboo thing, even if you were married, right? It was just something that was not talked about. It was not looked at as a natural thing, I guess, if you ask me. And so, if you were a guest at Frederick Douglass' house, you stayed on the right. If you were a male, if you were female, you stayed on the left of his home. And so, was one of the guest rooms for a man. If a man came to visit,
Even if you were courting somebody, Frederick Douglass, from my understanding, was a spiritual, religious man. He was a Christian, and so he believed in purity, of course, and things of that nature. And so, if you look in this picture at the very bottom, underneath the bed, there's like a pan there, and you may see one as I to give you show you pictures of other rooms of the home. They did not have a bathroom in this house. They had outhouses back then. And so if you had to use the bathroom, there was like this beautiful kind of pan with a lid on it, and you would go use the bathroom in that. And every morning, the servant's job was to dump the feces out each and every morning. Imagine that. So they did not have bathrooms back then. All right, so this is a bedroom, and if you look straight ahead, you see like this opening with a red curtain that leads to Frederick Douglass's room. But there were doors back then, but they took them down, I guess, for the purposes of turning the home into a museum to kind of make it more accessible and easily to be able to see and to navigate and get around throughout the home. Straight across from the guest bedroom, this was the room of his wife, Anna Marie Douglass. She died in this room. She had a stroke, she was ill, and she died in this room. After she passed away, Frederick Douglass closed the room off. Nobody used it. He kind of left it as like a shrine to her. Even when he remarried Helen Pitts Douglass, she never used this room, and she continued that kind of kind of respect, and she continued that kind of wish that he had even after he died, that nobody used this room. And so this was her room where she slept and where she was. um, and so we have that. This is a picture of Helen Pitt's room. Helen Pitts Douglas, this was her room. In her room, she had a typewriter. She looked like she was into sewing and things of that nature. This is her bed, a better picture of her bed. Okay. And so, not only that, but once you walk out of her room, you get to see this beautiful image of the hallway. And so, the tour guide told us that when Anna Marie Douglass, on her, as the last later years of her life, she was ill, and so sometimes her workers or the staff would, roll her out to the hallway so she could see, get a little bit of daylight, get a little bit of sunshine, and they would roll her up here. And so the rooms that sit on the opposite side of each other here would be, to the left would be Helen Pitts Douglas's room, and to the right would be the room of Frederick Douglass. And so let's look into Mr. Douglas's room to see what his bedroom looked like. This is the bedroom of the Frederick Douglass. And you see the two pots there at the bottom of his bed. That's where he would go use the bathroom, in those pots. And like I said, there's no electricity in this house. So, and they have the windows kind of covered up to protect the artifacts that's in the room. This furniture, to my understanding, is original. The bed is original. There is a shirt. If you're looking towards the window, there's a shirt that's draped over the chair. That is the original shirt of Frederick Douglass. That shirt is over 150 years old, to my understanding. And so the curators and everybody who works here, they had to actually wear gloves to handle a lot of the clothing, to not get any fingerprints on them and to not damage the material. Yes, even clothes, they have to wear gloves when they handle his personal belongings. This is another view of Frederick Douglass's room. A couple years ago, they had his shoes at the edge of his bed, because history tells us that when he would get out of the bed, he would put his house shoes on and he would work out. He had dumbbells. They removed them. They plan on putting them back, and he had like a straw hat. This is his armoire, or whatever you call it, where he would put his place his clothes. He had a fireplace in his bedroom. And so it's just so eerie and strange being here. Like, man, Frederick Douglass lived here. This was his room. This was his personal quarters, you know? And so this is another angle of his room. Come out of his room. There's steps there would lead to the attic. And upstairs would be additional rooms where his grandchildren would sleep. Okay? And so this house was a really, really, really big house. Like I said, originally it was 14 rooms. By the time Frederick Douglass was finished, it was a total of 21, 22 rooms. All right. So this is the second floor. Let's go back down the steps. We go back down the steps. This we're back into the foyer. All right. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this picture is because February the 20th, 1895, Frederick Douglass spent most of the morning at an event, I believe, with Susan B. Anthony and other women who were fighting or having an event for women's rights. Now, mind you, there was a little bit of a tiffy-taff-taff between Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony because she was fighting for the woman's right to vote. Frederick Douglass said, he was fighting for his people, African American people, to have the right to vote and have their rights. And so there was a bit of they had a little bit of a beef, and so they kind of made up there, and they welcomed him that morning to the event. He spent a great deal of the morning of the day there with them, just being in attendance, right? And they welcomed him. They didn't give him the strong arm and like we don't want you here kind of thing. They were excited to have Frederick Douglass there that particular day, and witnesses say that he was in a good mood. He was feeling great. There's one witness, if you read, I can't remember which article it was that I read, but one article said that there was a witness that saw him clutching, kind of aggressively clutching his arm or tugging at his arm in some way, which was a sign that he was probably having a heart attack or some type of stroke or something like that. But anyway, he was in a good mood. He spent most of the day there. He comes back to Cedar Hill to have a bite to eat because now he has to go off and do a speech at a local AME church. And so he comes home and he greets his wife, Helen Pitts Douglass, who's home. Their servant is gone for the day, I believe, or they're not around. And they're in the foyer, and he's beginning to tell her about the event that he went to that morning. And so as he's telling her, Frederick Douglass starts to clutch his chest. He's having a heart attack, supposedly, or I believe that's what was going on. And he drops dead right here in this foyer. So this foyer is where Frederick Douglass presumably took his last breath. Okay, dropped dead right here in the foyer. And I hope I'm not saying it too harshly, but this was where Frederick Douglass spent the last moments of his life. And so not only did he spend the last moments of his life, Frederick Douglass was the most photographed man of the 19th century. And so if you look at all of his pictures, for the most part, he's not smiling in them because he wanted the world to know how serious he was about the work he was doing. I mean, he was not ashamed to take pictures, and he looked good in his pictures to the point to where um he wanted people to know that yes, black people are not just enslaved or people that you can enslave, but African Americans are people who can look distinguished, look like they have pride, look like they have dignity. And so, any picture that you find of Frederick Douglass, he looks distinguished, he looks intelligent, he looks put together, he looks like an intelligent man of color. And I was able to find, well, I found a picture years ago, but there's an article with the Washington Post where after Frederick Douglass died, there is a deathbed picture where he was laying upon his bed or what have you. But anyway, after he died, somebody came in to take a picture of Frederick Douglass, and this is Frederick Douglass after he peacefully passed away. I would say peacefully in his home, unfortunately from a heart attack. And the photographer was able to come in to, not only were they able to do a death cast, but somebody did a deathbed picture of Frederick Douglass, and this is the one that you can actually find online. If you just type in deathbed, Frederick Douglass deathbed, this is the picture of Frederick Douglass after he passes away in his home. God rest his soul. And so now that is the home of Frederick Douglass. You come outside, and you see that there's actually a wine cellar. But he was a Christian. He did not drink, but he had a wine cellar in his house. If you come out of the front, make a left, walk around the home, you'll see there was kind of like a basement wine cellar. And then he also had a growlery. And so the growlery is behind the home. This is the growlery. This is where he would go when he was upset, when he wanted to probably go off. That is the growlery, and they had to actually reconstruct it. And so this is what it looked like, circa 1893. Frederick Douglass was alive and living here. This is what the growlery looked like back then. But to my understanding, the tour guide told us that they actually reconstructed it down to the T. So they remade it the very exact same way that it looked like when Frederick Douglass was alive. And this is simply all it looked like. It had a desk, had a chair, nothing simple, very modest fireplace. He would go to write in this place. And anybody knew that if he was in the growlery, you were not to disturb him under any circumstances, because this was like his man cave. And this is kind of the inside video I was able to take of the growlery. This is all it looked like. He had a very nice home. It was a mansion, but the man cave looked very basic, very modest, very simple. And so that's his growlery. And so there you have it, folks. That is the tour of Cedar Hill. Frederick Douglass, the home of Frederick Douglass, who's a famous abolitionist, fought for freedom. He was an author, a writer, a statesman. He was the recorder of deeds. He was the first U.S. marshal. He was an advisor to some. He was eventually became close with President Abraham Lincoln. He sat on the inaugural committee of Benjamin C. Harrison. He was the minister to Haiti. He was a wealthy man. He was a sought after man. And even after, I believe, John Brown did what he did in terms of trying to help to free slaves and try to help fight and combat against slavery, he spent about 2 years overseas, and I believe it was Britain, because mind you, he was not officially a free man. He escaped slavery, but he did not. Nobody bought or helped him to buy his freedom, and so while he spent time overseas, his supporters actually helped him to buy him from his former slave master, which ultimately ended up him becoming a free man, because they gave him his freedom after they bought him from his slave master in support of him. And so this home is a beautiful home. It's in the heart of Southeast D.C. Frederick Douglass was known as the Lion of Anacostia. Anacostia is the neighborhood, or the area rather, where Frederick Douglass, where he lived. And so he's also known as the sage of Southeast, the sage of Anacostia, the wisdom. And so there's a lot of people that live in this area where Frederick Douglass lived. And sometimes, particularly African Americans, people of color, this is history that literally sits in their neighborhood. And sometimes we don't realize it and value that, hey, this is history right in our neighborhood. And if you ever are in the Washington D.C. area, if you ever in the Southeast area, even if you can't for whatever reason get a tour inside of the home, go on the property. And sometimes I will go here just to be inspired, just to sit on the property like, man, this was a great man that lived here. I too can do great things. I too can do wonderful things in my time. I too can write a book. I too can think. I too can be creative and address the issues of my time, just like Frederick Douglass addressed the issues of his time. So if you ever have an opportunity to go to Cedar Hill, please go. It's a wonderful home. It's a beautiful home, well kept, well preserved. And so that's all the time I got for you all today. I am Deontay Curl, host of Turn Up the Volume podcast. Make sure you leave a comment. Let me know what your favorite room of the house is or was. Let me know your comments, your thoughts of the videos. If you have anything you want to say in relation to Frederick Douglass, Put it in the comments. Make sure you like, tag, share, and subscribe, and follow me on all social media platforms. I'm out. Y'all be good. Take care of yourselves. Happening? This is Deontay Curl, host of Turn Up the Volume podcast. Listen, do me a favor. If you like this video, do yourself a favor and hit the subscribe button. Also, tap the bell and turn on all of your notifications to see this and more interviews and more shows from my podcast right here on my YouTube page. So y'all hit that like button, tag, share, and subscribe. Y'all be good.